These are my badges. I went to the aerospace village this year like I do every year, so I'm kind of in love with learning more and more about space. Jeeps, I'm a big Jeep guy, so of course mine is lifted on 35s. So I've been a Jeep guy for over 10 years, so that's one of my hobbies, off-roading. Just got into e-bike. This is my bike here. Just got that a couple months ago, so I'm a big e-biker now. Can't believe it took me so long to get into the hobby, but I like it a lot. PC gamer, any PC gamers here? Okay, I thought everybody's hands would go up, but okay. We're not talking about consoles, don't count. So no PS5, no Xbox. So I'm a big PC gamer. I got a new rig last year, a Dell Alienware, so that's pretty nice. Been in cyber 23 years, and if anybody know anything about Saudi Aramco, many years ago they had an epic hack. I was working there at the time when I walked in that morning when everything was going to hell in a handbasket. So if you want some interesting stories from the Saudi Aramco hack, you could always talk to me as well too. So that was a big time watershed moment for the oil and gas industry. So with that, as far as our agenda, we're going to just talk about space. You know, that's why we're all here. Why is space so interesting? You know, forget about AI. Forget what I tell you about AI. Space is where you want to be. So nobody's talking about this, though. Everybody talks about AI, but everything is moving to space. All the technologies you hear about, including AI, machine learning, all that stuff, is moving to space, and it's moving to space very, very rapidly. I will talk about the satellite infrastructure. A lot of people know what a satellite is, but we'll tell you a little bit more about how those work. DEF CON, I'll tell you about my aerospace village experience at DEF CON. So there's something momentous that happened there. We'll talk about ham radio. We have to talk about ham radio. So we'll talk about ham radio on satellites. I have a little rig up here that my colleague Scott set up here, where we're tracking the International Space Station. And then we also have some amateur radio satellites that we're tracking here with an application. So you guys can come up afterwards, and then we'll be able to show you guys that. We'll also have that at our ham radio village as well, too. But all these satellites are up, and they're also trackable as well, too. So that in itself can be another risk if you think about it. But all these things can be tracked openly on the web. And missile bombs and keyboards, we'll just talk about some threats and risks, supply chain, and just some final thoughts as well, too. So just to give you guys a little quick history lesson. So space, everybody's doing it. You have the fear of missing out. So every country that you can think of is doing something in space, because space is suddenly becoming more affordable. You know, usually it takes a lot of money to go to space, a lot of fuel, a lot of engineering. You need a big rocket, all those kind of things to go to space. But now you have companies specializing in every different parts of that supply chain, where you could just buy what you need to go to space. So if, say, Carl here wants to go to space, if he has enough money, he could just contract out Uncle Elon's rocket, right? Build some satellites, and he could launch that in space. And they even have space tourism, which is taking off as well, too. So we'll talk about that later, too. So satellite count. This number kind of blew my mind. It's about 8,000 satellites in what they call low Earth orbit, which is about 200 to 300 miles above sea level. So about 8,000 satellites there, with projected about 100,000 in 10 years. So if you guys pay attention to the news, you'll see that satellites are being launched almost every other week. And it's not just one satellite, it's several satellites in that payload as well, too. So that number might not be too unrealistic. So going back in time, the first satellite, of course, Russia beat us again. So Russia had their Sputnik 1 satellite back in '57. And of course, the US said, hey, I could do what you do. So a year later, we launched Explorer 1 in '58. So this is a picture of Sputnik 1, and that's the launch module that you see in the background. It launched the module from the nose, and then it just went into orbit from there. So that's Sputnik 1. You can see how crude those satellites look. None of our satellites look like that today, if you've ever seen a picture of a satellite. So that's kind of the early starts of everything. And our first commercial satellite from the US was called Telstar 1. And anybody knew what happened in 1969? Anything monumental happened in '69 as far as space? Okay. Yeah, pretty monumental, right? So we're first to land on space, in the moon. So we beat the Russians at something finally. So we landed on the moon. And don't let anybody tell you that that's a conspiracy theory. So satellite 101. Basic definition of a satellite from science class, if you guys remember 8th grade science. A satellite is just, you have a larger body and a smaller object moving around that larger body. So say I'm a larger body, and you have like the neighbor's chihuahua running around that chihuahua would be a satellite. So you have the Earth and the Sun, and you have the Moon and the Earth. Quick examples of satellite. Earth is a satellite, and Moon is a satellite. So what are satellites used for? Besides using it to get here at the conference, how many people use GPS to get to the conference today? Yeah, okay, the rest of you haven't memorized, I guess, huh? So, yeah, I use GPS as well, and of course it messed up once. But, GPS is not flawless, but everybody knows GPS is one of the biggest things we use with satellites. Anybody check the weather today? Yeah, do we use satellites for weather as well? Yeah, we do. That's one of the biggest reasons we do have satellites. It's for weather prediction and studying weather as well. So these are the long list of things that are coming for satellites. Of course, the usual surveillance, intelligence gathering, natural disasters. Of course, you have Elon and his Starlink. Anybody has Starlink? Wow, amazing. You see, this, like 3 years ago, you would probably have no hands for Starlink. So I'm surprised to see that many. But internet over space is definitely a real thing. If you remember back in the old days when you had sat phones and all that stuff, you couldn't really do internet over space because it was high latency. If you remember back then, you couldn't really send anything because it was like dit, dit, dit. We have a thing in satellite called slow scan TV, and that's exactly how it is. We get images from the satellite, and it's literally just painting the screen one line at a time, and it's all black and white. It's that slow. But now you could do 350. What speed do you guys get on Starlink? What's your high speed? 250. What's yours? 500 up? Oh, okay. Okay, who has tested their Starlink? What's the actual speed you guys get? What's the actual speed you get on Starlink testing? 250? Okay. In rural area, okay. So that's pretty impressive. You could do a lot with 250. You could probably stream some 4K on 250, all that stuff. So it's definitely becoming a viable solution. And Elon is pretty much launching Starlink satellites almost every other week. So he has about 5,000 in orbit, if you guys didn't know that. And that's a ridiculous number if you think about it. So that's a lot of space pollution. Go ahead, Carl. Yeah. Correct. So Uncle Elon has the most satellites in orbit. And he's adding more. So because, I don't know if you know this, but when you have things like Amazon is doing their own broadband as well. I don't know if you guys heard about that. And the name escapes me now. But when they do stuff like that, they make a contract with the FAA, and you have to do a certain amount of launches and get a certain amount of satellites in orbit by a certain amount of time. So say by 26, you're supposed to have like your 10,000 satellites launched, because that's the agreement, and after that you can't launch anymore. So that's really how those contracts work as far as launching those satellites. So sometimes you'll see those companies being very aggressive because sometimes their time is coming up that they need to get their satellites in orbit. Everything is on contract. And of course you have low Earth orbit, that word always messes me up. Low Earth orbit, and then you have geostationary orbit, which is where, say if you're doing surveillance, the satellite will stay in that one position and just move with the Earth around. Whereas traditional satellites, you have a window. You have what they call a satellite pass. So like even in ham radio, when we're doing our satellite communications, in ham radio, we could talk like to the ISS if we want International Space Station, but you only have maybe an 8-minute window or 12-minute window that it passes over you, that you could talk to the astronauts on the ISS. So that's the downside of having those satellites that orbit the Earth compared to those that are in geostationary orbit. They're always in the same location, observing that same location all the time. So that's a big difference. And talking about infrastructure, this will help us understand things from a cybersecurity perspective. So it's not just about satellites. Satellites have to talk to somebody and get their commands from somewhere. So these are the ground stations or comms. So You have ground stations here that are connected to the backbone, which is the internet. So the analyst at the ground station sends commands up to the satellite. And then also you need launch ports, or what they're calling space ports now, to launch your missiles, or launch your rockets, not missiles, launch your rockets into space. So these are called space ports now. So you can see the different links in the chain where things can be exploited. But a lot of this communication is unencrypted. And once again, with satellites, what I just mentioned, you have a certain window to communicate with your satellite. The same thing applies to ground stations. So when they're sending commands to the satellite, they'll have to wait for it to come in visible sight, send the commands, and hopefully, it's not much bandwidth. Even though Starlink does like 250 megs, et cetera, satellites don't do that speed. So it's kilobits of data that you're sending to the satellite, so you have to hope that whatever transmission you want to send to the satellite is done within that pass. Otherwise, you have to wait till another pass to do it. So that's a big problem there as well, too. And all that data is unencrypted as well, too. Okay, so flipping over, anybody heard of Hackasat? 1, 2, okay, 4 people, okay, wow. So once again, space is a frontier that not many people know about in cyber. So Hackasat is a big deal. This happened at DEF CON for the past 4 years. So Hackasat is sponsored by the Space Force. Anybody ever heard of the Space Force? Yeah. Yeah, Space Force used to be a meme back when it was first created. So now it's not a meme anymore because it's super important now for securing our security in space. So they're a very important branch of the military. So Hackasat, it happened the past 4 years, but the big thing about this year is that, and I'll talk about it in the next slide, but this was the first year that they actually had a real satellite to hack. So the government actually launched a satellite this year in time for DEF CON. So these competitors can hack the satellite. So they had their own sandbox in space. Before, everything was simulations the past 3 years. And as you can see, this was another badge in the top right from DEF CON. So that was the Wright brothers plane there. That badge was so hard to get. By the time I got there, they were done. They were sold out. So those went like hot cakes. And then down below, I just put an example of a talk that they have at the Aerospace Village. So you can see this one, Dissecting Wireless Privacy in Aviation. So everything is aviation related or space related when you go to the Aerospace Village. And it's pretty fun. It's always a packed village, so it's really hard to sit down and do anything in there as far as labs. Okay, so this is the information on Hackasat. So you can read through some of this. This was the name of the satellite, Moonlighter. And you can see 5 teams, and you can see how many applicants they had for those 5 spots. Now these are competitors from around the world, from Italy, from the US, you name it, everybody was submitting applications because this is real high-profile stuff. A lot of these applicants work for companies that provide services to space. So if you say, hey, my team in Italy won the Hackasat, that gives you big bragging rights for contracts because the government is just tossing money out at contracts. And you'll see that in a minute here. So Italian team won this year. So you can learn more about Moonlighter here. So it was a pretty small satellite. It's a 3U satellite. So if you know anything about server racks, you know what 3U is. So it's a pretty tiny satellite. So you can see a picture of it on the side there. It looks nothing like Sputnik 1, as you can see. So it has your solar panels, all that kind of stuff on there. And you can just read through it. In July is when it launched. And DEF CON is in what month? Anybody remember when DEF CON is? August. So July, this satellite went up. On August, they were hacking the satellite. So that tells you all you need to know there. So I pretty much went over everything here. These are some memes I pulled off the internet. There are too many to choose from. So I just picked a select few. And then down below, of course, is our beloved Space Force symbol, worn proudly. Okay, and then this was some pictures I snapped at Hackasat. This one on the left, it had a little lab down here. They have these Legos. These are actually Legos. I don't know who put them together. So they had these Legos of these plane and helicopter, and then they had these circuit boards that you had to hack into. So it had the paper here that told you what to do, and all you're doing is typing in commands like 0x1 means like shut down the engines, and then 0x3 means give me a diagnostic, and those kind of things. But that's basically how you're talking to these devices. It's in this code. You don't type in, hey, shut down the engines. Everything is codes, codes, codes. And you can see it's very small. These are like 1 bit of code that you're sending every time. So everything has to be small and efficient when you're dealing with communicating with these type of systems. And over here, it's hard to get a good picture because there were so many people crowding around this thing. But this is an engine from a Falcon 9, SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket. I don't know how they got that, but this lady had on a SpaceX shirt on the right. But that was big time that they had that at the village. I don't know how Elon let them have a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket engine to put there, but I was really impressed that they had that. And then I have the lovely space suit. As you can tell, it doesn't look like the big bubbles that they used to wear anymore. They become a little more stylish now. And I don't have this in my presentation, but I, I listen to the space podcast as well too. And a lot of brands that you won't think of are partnering with space agencies. So to make the next spacesuits, NASA is partnering with Prada. Anybody ever heard of Prada? Yeah. I had to, stylish spacesuit, maybe some expensive spacesuits as well too. So Prada will be helping NASA design the next spacesuits as well too. So you get to go to space inside. I don't even let them put their insignia on there, but we'll have to see. But I thought that was kind of interesting. And I'll just tell you one more thing I don't have in my presentation. As far as like space tourism, they have these companies that'll give you like balloon rides to the edge of space, which is like 30 miles above sea level. To be officially in space per NASA, FAA, you have to be at least 50 miles above sea level. So they're taking you right at the edge where you can see the curvature of the Earth. And the company that's partnering with them is Mercedes. Anybody ever heard of Mercedes? Yeah. So they're partnering with somebody to have these balloons and give you luxury rides to the edge of space and back, where it's full catered. You have the usual things that you expect from Mercedes, and then they bring you back after whatever certain amount of minutes. So I thought it was really interesting. I had to rewind that one too because I thought that was a joke, but I didn't expect to see somebody like Mercedes doing something like that. But you could see how a lot of companies are jumping on the dollars of people wanting to go to space and the government tossing out all this money. Everybody is jumping into space. All the non-traditional companies are jumping in, and a lot of startups too. So this is just a space policy I wanted to put in here. This is from the DoD, but pretty much the same thing, same words that they use for everything else, but pretty much they're concerned with just protecting space. You can see this about adversary, hostile uses of space. If you've been paying attention a bit, there's a lot of Chinese launches, if you guys haven't seen that. And a lot of their launches are very generic in nature. They'll say like weather satellite or this satellite, but it's very generic when they announce what their payloads are. But we all know that it's not exactly what they're saying, so that has a lot of people concerned. And then one of the big things down here is just having deterrences in space, and I'll talk about some of that coming up. And if the deterrences don't work, then we want to prevail in conflict, basically. So if our deterrences or the bouncer at the door doesn't work, then we're going to use the gun we have behind the bar. Okay, so as far as comms, satellite comms and ham radio, any hams in here? Anybody? Oh my gosh, okay, this is good to see. So it's good, and it's, my voice almost got hoarse today because we had so much traffic at our ham radio village that I was doing so much talking today. But we had such a good turnout at our ham radio village, and I was surprised. Even like Carl is one of my friends from a long time. I didn't even know this guy was a ham. So that tells you how much Carl and I talk. But I noticed at least 5 friends today that I didn't even know were hams as well too. So this is good. A lot of cyber folks are actually hams. If you go to DEF CON, you see people with their HTs, their handhelds, like these. You'll see guys with these walking around clipped to their backpacks with an earpiece in or something, and they're walking around talking to their friends at DEF CON with this. Because a lot of times your cell network is congested, but also you can't really hack these. compared to like a cell phone or something. So I think that's why a lot of people use them because they're a little more low tech, so they're not really going to be hacked by the DEF CONers. If you guys been to DEF CON, you'll know what I mean. So any electronic device is fair game at DEF CON, even ATMs, which that's another story. we got kicked out of a hotel because of that once. DEF CON. So as far as tracking satellites, these are some of the basic things you need. And if you want to learn more, you could come to our village. We could show you some of the setups over there. But basically, you just need a ham radio. Even a HT like I have here can do it. You just need a special antenna, which you'll see in the next section. Satellite tracking apps, they have those on the web or on your phone. And like I mentioned, it tells you exactly where satellites are and how long the passes are, how high they are, etc. An antenna, and then just line of sight. So they have this organization called AMSAT, so Amateur Satellite Corporation, formed back in the 60s. So you can see a traditional radio here, and then this is a directional antenna, so you kind of have to follow the satellite as it goes. And I've done some of this in the past. I did it recently at a function we call Field Day for ham radio. So you just follow the path of the satellite with that. And it has, on the app, at least the one we use, it has like a little circle that shows you as you line up your antenna, how you're lining up with the satellite, and you just follow it. And then you could hear the dialogue from the satellite as you follow the antenna. So sometimes this might be a two-man job, depending on what type of radar you're using, etc. But that's basically all you need, is just something like that. I won't get too much into AMSAT, but it's pretty much, it was formed to promote ham radio and research in space. That's basically what the main mantra of AMSAT is. And you could join up. All proceeds go towards forwarding that or furthering that goal. This is an example of one of the apps. And these are some amateur radio satellites here. You can see, up top, you can see the start. This is when the pass will happen. The next column is end. That's when the pass will end. So you can see some of these are very short. Like the first one, 8:13 a.m. This one ends at 2:40, so that's a long pass. The next one is 8:28 to 8:30, so that's a 2-minute pass. So you don't have much time to jump on that satellite. And a lot of people are jumping on that satellite too. So you're kind of fighting with people to talk to whoever's on the satellite. So this is how one of the apps looks. And the satellite tracking, this is the ISS. We have that app over here that you guys could take a look at later. So this one just pretty much tracks the ISS as it goes around the world. So once again, none of this stuff is secret. So all the intel is there. So you could think of it as a country or enemy that wants to knock out any satellites. All the info is there. They don't need to break into anything. All this is public knowledge. Okay, so this one was kind of interesting. And I kind of wanted to share this because this story kind of blew my mind a little bit. They had this company called Starfish, and they were launching a satellite in space to test it. But what their satellite does is that it repairs other satellites. So it's like nanites, if you guys know what nanites are, from Iron Man, when he fixes his suits and stuff. So this blew my mind that a satellite could fix another satellite, because of course you have the satellite going over, 6 figures miles per hour, and then this other satellite has to catch up with that satellite, maintain distance with that satellite, and then work on the satellite. And then to me, that just sounds like impossible. Maybe because I'm not an engineer or mathematician, but that sounds crazy that I don't think these satellites were going to collide. And when things collide in space, it's not just one thing hitting each other, it's a bunch of things hitting each other. So one thing hits each other, and then it just cascades out into a bunch of things colliding. And even the smallest speck of dirt in space can put a hole in a satellite. I don't know if you guys saw anything about the International Space Station. He had this guy that was trying to come home. He had a 6-month stint on the space station. It turned into a year. It was in the news on CNN, etc. And it was something really small that put a hole in the coolant tank in the ISS. And it stopped him from coming home. And then when he was trying to come home again, this shuttle that was coming to pick him up, another speck hit the shuttle and put a hole in the shuttle. And it was a tiny, tiny speck. And that delayed him coming home for a whole year. So you can see how dangerous space is. You don't need anything of any size to knock out a satellite or even knock out the ISS. So the ISS is always dodging things in space. So it's always adjusting every time. So this thing here, and I mentioned this here because I was really impressed with what they did. So of course, SpaceX Falcon rocket, That's the most popular transportation to space now. So SpaceX is staying really busy, especially since they have the reusable, what they call first stage, the rocket stage. It's reusable now. So they could use this thing like 8 to 12 times, and then if you ever watch the videos of these things, it's really amazing how they come back down to Earth. Anybody ever seen the Falcon 9 come back to Earth? Yeah, it'll blow your mind that it just lands precisely, and it's always like on a ship in the middle of the ocean. So imagine in the middle of the ocean, and this rocket is trying to come from space and land in this tiny dot in the middle of the ocean. To me, that's like mind-blowing that they have that kind of precision. And it doesn't tip off and fall in the water or nothing like that. So this one here, when they were trying to launch these satellites, one of the satellites had a problem and it started to spin. So they had this under what they call it tumbling, and then what they were trying to do is detumble this satellite. So sometimes the satellite is not released properly, it'll just start moving and tumbling, and it'll spin faster and faster and faster, and then it's in like this death roll, basically, and it can't recover from that. So what this satellite was doing is trying to get it out of this tumble. So just to illustrate some of the things that they had to do to communicate with the helper satellite, is that they had to uplink over what they call UHF, which is a specific frequency. So they had to uplink to the satellite. The satellite was spinning at 330 degrees per second. They had to create new code for the satellite to correct the spin. So they had to create new code, test it, everything on Earth, on the ground station. Then they had a 90-minute uplink window to fix the satellite. So depending on how long that update will take, they only had 90 minutes to send that code, see if it'll correct it, and then they had to wait another time for it to pass back around and send another adjustment to try and fix it as well, too. So it was kind of interesting how they did all this. They did this all in really quick time, but I was really amazed. I was just really amazed by how they did it. So this was a really good illustration of how you could fix things in space. And this wasn't even intentional. Yes, it did work. So good question. I should have finished with that. But it did work, and it proved their technology, and Starfish was really proud to see that that did work. Okay, any questions so far? I'll take questions as I go along, so I don't want to wait till the end. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand, and we could take those as we go along. Okay, one of the big things that I noticed from this, a lot of this stuff is just my opinion and interpretation, but it's kind of like the great equalizer. You know, in the past, if you had like nuclear weapons, warheads, it's only like, 3 or 4 countries that have nuclear weapons. But now with space, everybody can have an opportunity to go to space. So I found it interesting that Africa, and you know Africa you always see as one of those countries that's always falling behind as far as technology, but they are one of the leaders as far as space is concerned. So they are estimating a $22 billion space economy by 26. And what year is this? 23, right? So in 3 years, they're going to have $22 billion space economy. So the main drivers you can see there, go ahead, ma'am. That's what, a lot of it has to do with Earth observation and what they call digital inclusion. So it's pretty much the same thing that everybody else is setting up, but it's for them at that point to monitor their continent, basically. Weather, everything else. No, the article I read did not specify that. They spoke about it from a continent level. This is where I get it if you want to look it up. Space in Africa. Yeah, they were just talking about from the continent level. So investment, most of it is in launch facilities and ground stations. So you saw what launch facilities are, those spaceports. And ground stations are the one that communicate to satellites. Because the good thing with launch facilities and spaceports now, before it was only like in the NASA and those places that had those facilities, but now you can rent those out from these companies. So that's why they're building these. It's not for them to launch, but now you can say, hey, because if you try to launch at a government facility, you're waiting a long time to get ahead of the DoD and all the stuff that they're doing with Cape Canaveral and in a base that they have in California, which is very busy. You're waiting a long time to get on that list. So everybody else says, hey, I see that as an opportunity, so let me build my own launch facility and ground station to communicate with satellites, and I'll just rent it out to people. So that's where this money is coming in from, is them leasing out these services, which sounds ridiculous because before, you had to have some ridiculous amount of money to do a lot of this stuff, but now it's becoming much easier because you could get all these other companies and private industries to build this stuff for you cheaply, and then assemble it, and then you just privatize it after that. So going to the question as far as what's going on, spacecraft propulsion is a big thing that they're doing with their economy because, of course, you need better jet engines. And, of course, fuel is very expensive to launch a rocket. So they're try and experiment with different types of fuels. They're trying to do more like biofuels as well, too. So it just depends if they'll get the amount of lift from those biofuels and the amount of burn from those biofuels as well, too. Of course, our friends, AI and machine learning, don't want to be left out. So that's in there, and I'll talk about the benefits of that. Robotics, you guys seen the ARM and the ISS. So you have big data analytics, small satellite constellations, those type of things as well, too. So I won't read all these, but these are just some of the contracts in space. SpaceX is reaping a lot of benefits of what's going on in space. I just want you guys to look at some of these numbers. It's really why I put this here. You can see the amount of money that's available for space contracts. You have the 70 million, you have 15 million. You have SpaceX providing Starlink services in Ukraine. Before, Elon was giving that away for free, and he's like, nah, I can't do this anymore. Somebody got to pay me. So the DoD now is paying him money to provide that service. But, of course, you have Lockheed Martin, Boeing, all those other players as well, setting up national security payloads, which pretty much equals spy satellites. So a lot of those are going up in orbit because of the activity from China and Russia as well. And the big thing is, it's space, right? Who owns space? Is space covered over you? Like, who owns that, So that's the big problem here is that somebody can launch and say, hey, I'm going to put 5,000 satellites up this year, and who's going to stop them? And one of the big things is that astronomers are complaining about all the satellites in space because of the reflection from the sun, and their telescopes can't see past those satellites. So that's a big problem as well because you have so many satellites now, it's really hard for astronomers to do their job as well. So a lot of numbers here. And one of the big ones here is that was kind of scary and telling is that China was launching some GPS satellites, which pretty much designing their own GPS network. So they won't have to rely on ours. So their system is called Baidu's, and they launched about 45 satellites so far. But, the security guy in me says, hey, if you're putting up your own stuff, that means you're going to try and knock my stuff offline, and then you're going to keep working. So that's what has a lot of our DoD folks nervous, is that China's putting these satellites up because they eventually could attack our GPS system. So these are the kind of things that we're keeping an eye on as well. And then this was a big one too. I don't know if you remember at the start of the Ukrainian war, Russia knocked out GPS for Ukraine, so they couldn't launch their drones. You need GPS for drones. You need GPS to launch missiles. All those things need GPS. So Ukraine jammed those signals. Yes, and I'll get back there. Yeah, that's a good question, asking about if you'll see a type of United Nations for space. And I think it'll have to come to that at some point because this is getting crazy, the amount of competition in space. So they have to have some kind of agreement. And they don't have a United Nations yet, but there's a lot of agreement with other countries for space right now. They have different treaties that are signed, but it might get to the United Nations type level eventually, I think. Question in the back. Yes. Yes. It's over yet. And that's a good point too, because you don't really have to knock a service out. You don't have to denial of service a service. You could just make it give bad data. Imagine bad weather data, bad GPS data. All those things is all you need. So if somebody could upload code to change something by a second or whatever, that's all it takes. And you can see how long it takes to remedy some of that stuff. It's something you have to go write new code, and then you have to upload the code. So that problem will exist for a short time, and that might be all that they need. So as far as tech in space, yeah, good observations. But I kind of want to just give you a lot of this information so you can start thinking about a lot of this. But these are all the tech that's happening in space. There's a lot more, so I just crammed in the best ones. And a lot of these I've talked about. A lot of them, one of the big ones is encrypted communication, the third bullet. So that's big for the DoD, of course, but also for other companies as well to do encrypted communication in space because everything is unencrypted right now. Let's see what else. We talked about satellite servicing. Satellite decommissioning is a big one. Anybody think, how long do you think satellites live in space? Do they stay up there forever? So if DirecTV launches a new satellite, how long do you guys think that lasts in space? 15 years? Yeah, some people estimate between 3 to 7 years for a satellite, depending. And then it'll start to deorbit. So it's not a long lifespan. So either you got to manually take those satellites out with some kind of service, or you got to move them to like a different orbit. Like DirecTV, DirecTV had this issue, and the FAA pretty much tell them, hey, you got to move your satellite because it's not working to a different orbit away from these other satellites so it doesn't crash into these satellites when it fails. And they got fined a lot of money because they didn't honor that agreement and they didn't move their satellite. So the FAA fined them for that. But these are all the different things that satellites will have. The biggest one on the bottom is SAS. I think SAS is already taken. But, but they're starting to do this where they have satellites launched and they'll sell or rent that functionality, like weather observation or whatever observation is doing, to anybody that wants it. To say, hey, I need a 10-hour window on your satellite, they'll rent that out. So satellite as a service. And this is just something with radio communications. S-band and K-band are some popular channels for satellites, but these can be jammed as well. These don't have any tech to protect against that. And of course, software-defined radios is a big deal. And just wrapping up with risks here. Anybody remember what movie this is from? Like, what's that? Yeah, Moonraker. It's an old James Bond movie from the 60s or 70s. But this blew my mind back in the day when they did this. So this thing was gobbling up this satellite. So that was pretty neat, which is, I could see that actually being reality now. So just as far as risks, the usual stuff you see every day in cybersecurity, it's nothing new on the list. So it's just a matter of implementing these fixes for all this stuff. You have the usual weight limits, storage limits. You have very small chips on these satellites. Territorial conflicts. You could sell textiles to highest bidders. International collaboration. All this stuff is important. One of the big things with satellite is just the partnerships around the world. A lot of different companies offer, and a lot of different companies in different countries offer satellite services to some degree. So what happens if you decide, like say, Starlink, and then Starlink gets mad at Ukraine and say, hey, I'm not going to provide you my service anymore. So you shut down the whole communication for their army. So what do you do now? All those things are possible because those are private companies. Your governments in different countries can't make those companies do what they need to do. Okay, I'm just wrapping up here with mitigations, the same things. You can look on the right. These are some companies that are popping up. Once again, look at those dollar figures, and especially the one on the bottom. So this is not a typo. This is $1 billion awarded to one company by the federal government. So this is to deploy kind of like hack-resistant comms for the military. That's what they're doing here. And they have a $1 billion contract to do that. So it's a lot of money being tossed around. So that's why everybody and anybody is jumping into this space. So, and you have the Johns Hopkins, et cetera. So quantum-resistant technology, all those things are very important. And there are 16 critical infrastructure segments designated by the US government. They're thinking about making space the 17th. And if you make it a critical infrastructure, it gets afforded a lot of different things that it wouldn't usually get, like extra money, extra attention, et cetera, by making it a critical infrastructure. And I think that's it. So come visit us at the Ham Radio Village. We'll be there. Anybody know what that movie is? Today and tomorrow for the Ham Radio Village. What's that movie? Anybody know? Yeah, sure. No. Who? What movie? Anybody know? Yes. Good job. Yeah, it's not a thing right now. No, that's the problem with space is that people, it's just like when the internet first started. People didn't really think people would abuse the internet like how it is now. So they built it as easy and as cheaply and as whatever as possible. So that's kind of how it is with space. Everybody is doing it, but everybody is doing it like the most cost-effective way. And all the protocols that are existing now, they're very dated. Either from the 60s, either from the 70s. So they haven't really introduced anything new as far as protocols or security or anything into the process now. They're still doing things the same way that they already always did. The only thing improving is the satellite technology, the sensors, the radars, all that stuff is improving. But the actual back end, the communications, all that stuff is still the same. So that's the big problem that they're trying to fix now. Those would actually be encrypted. Anything that begins with the M word, yeah. Yeah, like when we flying drones from here in Ellington Field over to Afghanistan, that's encrypted communication. So anything that begins with the M word, which is military, will be encrypted. Yes. 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 And that's a good point. Yeah, if you have a stronger signal than me, just like in ham radio, we yeah, sure. But yeah, if you have a stronger signal, you could knock me off of that communication for sure. So go ahead. You know what? I don't know that. That's a good question. I've never looked that up. So they have some extent of maneuverability because they have to be able to get out of the way for certain things. But a lot of them are just dumb devices, and they just go in orbit and just do what they do. Yeah, I don't think any of them, or not many, are powered. That's a big problem. Question in the back, and then we could wrap up. If there is, there is. I think each country has their own NORAD. I don't think there's not a global NORAD that you know about, right? Is it global? Yeah. But they know pretty much every space junk that's out there, like the US does, and I'm sure other countries do. But everybody keeps track of what's happening in space. So every space junk, every satellite is accounted for. So, okay. All right. To the village. Come to the village.